My brother-in-law Derek said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. "You drove that thing here again? That 2009 Corolla with the dented bumper? Adrian, come on. You're embarrassing the whole family." I set down my fork, slowly, the way you do when you need a second to decide whether to respond or just let it go. I let it go. That was 3 months ago, at my in-laws' Thanksgiving dinner in Oakville. Derek had just closed some deal at the commercial real estate firm where he worked, the kind of deal he'd been mentioning every 15 minutes since we sat down. And he was in that particular mood where success makes a person meaner instead of kinder. My wife Rachel gave me that look across the table, the apologetic one she'd perfected over years of family dinners. I gave her the small nod back, the one that said, "It's fine, I'm fine, let's just get through dessert." But Derek wasn't done. "Seriously, man, you're what, 38? I've got a buddy at the dealership in Burlington. I can get you into something decent. Nothing crazy. Just something that doesn't look like it belongs in a student parking lot." My father-in-law, Gerald, cleared his throat but didn't say anything. My mother-in-law, Sandra, refilled her wine glass. Rachel's sister, Nicole, studied the tablecloth. Nobody pushed back. That was how it always went with Derek. He filled the air, and nobody pushed back. "I'm good with the Corolla," I said. "You're good with the Corolla." He repeated it like I'd just said something hilarious. "Right. Okay. What I didn't say, what I never said, not once in the 4 years Derek had been part of this family, was that the 2009 Toyota Corolla with the dented rear bumper was the car I chose to drive. Not because it was all I could afford, not because I hadn't looked at other options, but because it started every morning without complaint, never asked for more than it needed, and got me from my house in Hamilton to my office on Barton Street in exactly 19 minutes with no drama whatsoever. The fact that I owned the building on Barton Street, along with 6 other commercial properties across Hamilton, Brantford, and Stony Creek, was something Derek didn't know, something almost nobody in Rachel's family knew. Not because I was hiding it exactly, more because nobody had ever asked, in a way that felt like genuine curiosity rather than a measuring contest. I drove home that night in the Corolla with Rachel, quiet in the passenger seat and the radio off. She reached over somewhere past Dundas and put her hand on mine. "I'm sorry about him," she said. "You don't have to keep apologizing for him." "I know." A pause. "He just doesn't know when to stop. He doesn't know a lot of things," I said, and left it there. My name is Adrian Kowalski. I grew up in the East End of Hamilton in a house where my parents argued about hydro bills and my dad worked rotating shifts at the steel plant on Burlington Street. Not a bad childhood, not an easy one either. My mother was the kind of woman who clipped coupons on Sunday mornings and could stretch a pot of soup across 3 dinners, and she did it without bitterness, which I think was the more remarkable skill of the two. I was 22 when I bought my first property, a duplex on Cannon Street East that needed so much work the previous owners practically gave it away. I spent 8 months doing most of the renovation myself, nights, weekends, YouTube tutorials for things I'd never done before, and by the time I was done, I had 2 rentable units and a debt load I could manage. I rented both units out, kept living in my parents' basement for another year to build the down payment for the next one, and just kept going. That was the whole strategy. Nothing secret about it. Nothing genius. Just the same thing, over and over, for 16 years. Buy undervalued property, renovate, rent, refinance, buy the next one. The Corolla I bought used in 2013, when the one I'd been driving since college finally gave out. I paid cash. I thought about upgrading maybe twice after that, and both times I decided the money was more useful somewhere else. That's not sacrifice. That's just math. By the time Derek made his comment at Thanksgiving dinner, I owned 9 properties in the Hamilton area, had 12 long-term tenants, and had recently finalized the purchase of a mixed-use building in downtown Brantford that I planned to convert into 8 units on top and 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor. My accountant, a careful man named Phil who had been doing my books since year 3, told me my net worth was somewhere around $4.2 million, though he always said somewhere around, because the real number depended on how the market was moving that particular month. I was not rich in the way people mean when they say rich, like it's a different species. I still made my own coffee. I still drove the Corolla. I still called my mother every Sunday morning. But I was, by any practical measure, financially free. Had been for several years. I worked because I chose to, not because I had to. Derek, as far as I could tell, worked because he had to, spent most of what he made, and made up the distance between those two facts with a very aggressive personal brand. The Christmas gathering was at Gerald and Sandra's house in Oakville again. A big colonial on a quiet street where most of the neighbors had three-car garages and seasonal wreaths and opinions about property values. Rachel and I arrived in the Corolla. I watched Derek's face from across the driveway as we pulled in next to his leased BMW 5 Series. The one I'd heard him mention was 3 years into a 5-year lease. "You know what?" Derek said. "Before we'd even gotten through the front door, I thought you might show up in something different for Christmas." Wishful thinking. "Merry Christmas, Derek," I said. Inside, the house smelled like pine and Sandra's shortbread. Gerald had the hockey game on low in the den. Nicole was helping in the kitchen. It was the kind of house that felt warm when you walked in, and I'd always liked it here, even during the dinners that went sideways. We were barely through the appetizers when Derek steered the conversation toward real estate. His firm had just listed a property in Mississauga, something about a commercial plaza, a significant deal. He talked about cap rates and lease structures, with the casual fluency of someone who needed you to know he understood the language. I ate my bruschetta. "You ever think about getting into property, Adrian?" Derek asked. He said it pleasantly, the way people ask questions they already know the answer to. "I do a bit of that," I said. "Oh yeah? Like a rental property? Basement suite? That kind of thing?" "Little more than that." "Derek has been looking at investment properties himself," Sandra offered, in the tone of someone changing the subject. "Yeah, I've been doing the research," Derek said. "It's a strong market, but you've got to have the capital, obviously. The entry point in the GTA right now is brutal." "Hamilton's interesting," I said. Derek smiled. Not unkindly. "Sure, if you're thinking starter level, but there's not a lot of upside compared to the 905 corridor." Rachel touched my arm lightly under the table. I wasn't sure if it was a warning or encouragement. "I've done all right," I said, and left it at that. But Derek had a way of not leaving things. It was maybe his most defining quality. "All right, like 1 property? 2? He said it casually, reaching for the bread basket. 9, I said. The bread basket stopped moving. Gerald looked up from his plate. Sandra set down her wine. Nicole leaned in slightly from the kitchen doorway. 9 properties, Derek said. Give or take. Working on the 10th. Silence. The particular kind that happens when everyone in a room is recalibrating something. "In Hamilton?" Derek asked. "Hamilton, Brantford, Stony Creek. Mixed residential and commercial." Derek put down the piece of bread he'd been holding. "That's okay. That's actually significant. It adds up," I said. Slowly. Rachel was looking at me with an expression I recognized as the one she wore when she was trying to figure out how she felt about something. We'd been married 7 years. She knew I had properties. She knew the general shape of our financial situation. She'd just never heard me say the number out loud at her parents' dinner table before. I hadn't exactly planned to say it tonight either. But Derek had asked a direct question, and I'd given him a direct answer, which is the only kind I know how to give. "How long have you been doing this?" Gerald asked. His voice was different now, quieter, more genuine. "Since I was 22, I said. Bought a duplex on Cannon Street that needed a lot of work." "The Cannon Street property," Rachel said softly, almost to herself. "The one you were renovating when we first met. That's the one." She smiled a little at her plate. "We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday in 2013. I'd shown up with paint on my forearm that I hadn't noticed until she pointed it out. She'd thought it was funny. I'd thought she was the most interesting person I'd ever spoken to. We'd talked until the party ended, and then kept talking on the front porch until midnight." Derek had not yet recovered his usual footing. "So when you say net worth," he started. "Derek." Nicole said it from the kitchen doorway. A single word. He stopped. There was a moment. Gerald picked up his fork. Sandra mentioned that the main course was almost ready. The conversation moved, the way dinner conversations do, into safer territory. Rachel's work, Nicole's kids, the snowfall they were expecting by Thursday. Derek was quieter than usual for the rest of the meal. Not sulky exactly, more like someone doing mental arithmetic. After dinner, Gerald pulled me aside in the hallway near the coats. "I didn't know," he said simply. "I know you didn't. You never said." "Nobody asked," I said. Not in a way that seemed like they actually wanted to know. "Gerald is a retired civil engineer. He built things for 30 years, bridges, overpasses, infrastructure you drive across without thinking about twice. He understands the value of patient, unglamorous work. I always liked him for that. Your parents, he said. They know? My mom knows the general picture. My dad passed away in 2019. I'm sorry. I didn't know that either. It's okay. He was quiet for a moment. Your father would have been proud. I didn't say anything. Some things don't need a response. The conversation that mattered most happened later, when the dishes were done and Rachel and her sister were in the living room, and Gerald had fallen asleep in his armchair in front of the post-game show. Derek found me in the kitchen, refilling my coffee. Just the two of us. He stood in the doorway for a moment, hands in his pockets. I owe you an apology, he said. I waited. The stuff about the car, Thanksgiving, other times. He paused. I didn't know the situation. Not that it would have been okay even if I did, but I didn't know. I made assumptions. You did, I said. I was being a jerk. You were. He laughed a little, surprised. I think he'd expected me to be more gracious about it. To say it was nothing. We were good. Forget it. I didn't do that because it wasn't nothing. It had been consistently unkind, and it had made Rachel feel embarrassed at her own family table, more than once, which bothered me considerably more than any comment about my car. I'm sorry, he said again, genuinely, this time. Okay, I said. I appreciate that. We stood there a moment with our coffees. 9 properties, he said, not accusatory. More like he was still getting used to the sound of it. 9 properties. The Corolla, though. He shook his head. Best car I've ever owned, I said. No payments, no depreciation. Starts every morning. He looked at me for a second. You actually mean that? I actually mean it. He shook his head again, but differently this time. Less dismissive. More like someone encountering a way of thinking they hadn't considered before. My lease is up in March, he said, on the BMW. What are you thinking of doing? I don't know. Get another one, I figured. I didn't say anything. But I don't know, he said again. Driving home that night, Rachel was quiet for a long time. The highway was almost empty. Light snow was starting to fall, the kind that dusts the road without sticking. I had the heat on low and the wipers going intermittently. You could have told them sooner, she said eventually. I know. Why didn't you? I thought about it, because I didn't want it to change how they saw me, and because I knew once I said it, that's all they'd think about when they looked at me. At least for a while. Rachel was quiet. I wanted them to know me first, I said. The actual me. 7 years, Adrian. I know. Maybe too long. She reached over and took my hand. No, she said. I get it. I actually get it now more than I did before. What changed? Seeing Derek's face, she said. And then she laughed, really laughed, for the first time all evening, and I laughed too, and the snow kept falling lightly on the highway outside Dundas, and I drove the Corolla all the way home without once wishing I were driving anything else. Things shifted after that Christmas dinner. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the small, real ways that matter more than grand gestures. Gerald called me in January, not a holiday call, not a formality. He wanted to talk about the Brantford project, asked thoughtful questions about the conversion timeline, the zoning process, how I structured the financing. He'd spent 30 years around construction and development, and he had good questions. We talked for over an hour. Sandra started asking Rachel about my work at family events instead of steering around it. Nicole told me her husband had been thinking about getting into real estate investment and asked if I'd ever sit down with him. Derek showed up at a family dinner in February in a 2019 Honda CR-V he'd bought used for cash. He didn't announce it or make a thing of it. He just parked it, came inside, and when Nicole asked what happened to the BMW, he said the lease was up and he'd decided to try something different. I didn't make a big deal of it, but I noticed. In March, I hired a part-time coordinator for the properties, a young woman named Priya, fresh out of the urban planning program at McMaster, who was sharp and organized and already asking better questions than most people twice her age. I'd been handling everything myself until then. The tenant calls, the maintenance coordination, the bookkeeping. It was fine when it was 5 properties. At 9, it was starting to cost me more in time than I could justify. Phil, my accountant, had been telling me to hire help for 2 years. He was right. He usually was. One afternoon in April, Priya and I were walking through the Brantford building. She had a clipboard. I had a coffee, and she stopped in front of what was going to be the ground floor commercial space and said, "Do you have someone in mind for this unit yet?" "I've had a few inquiries," I said. "Nothing confirmed." "I have an idea," she said. "There's a woman I know from school who runs an after-school coding program for kids in lower-income neighborhoods. She's been operating out of a church basement, but she needs a real space. She can't afford market rent, but her program's got solid funding from 2 different foundations." I looked at the space. High ceilings, good light from the south-facing windows, enough room for maybe 20 workstations. "What kind of rate is she working with?" I asked. Priya named a number. It was below what I could get on the open market. Meaningfully below. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. "Set up a meeting," I said. The program moved in by June. 15 kids on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, learning Python, learning how to think in logic and sequence, and problem solving. Their laughter and arguing and keyboards clicking carried up through the floor of the residential units above, and one of my tenants mentioned it to me once, a retired teacher named Ron in Unit 3, and he said it was the best sound he'd heard in a building in years. I thought about my mother and her Sunday coupons, about the duplex on Cannon Street, and the YouTube tutorials, and the 8 months of evenings and weekends, about all the ways that small, persistent decisions accumulate into something you couldn't have drawn a picture of at the start. The Brantford building was fully tenanted by September. Phil ran the numbers. The return was solid. Not because I'd cut the deal on the commercial space, he'd raised an eyebrow at that, but because the residential side came in strong and the commercial unit, below market rent and all, had anchored a positive presence in the building that made it a place people wanted to live. "You could have gotten more," Phil said. "I know," I said, "but you're not losing sleep over it." "Not a minute," I said. Derek and I had lunch in Hamilton in October. His idea, a diner on King Street, nothing fancy, the kind of place with laminated menus and good coffee, and a counter where the regulars all know each other's orders. He'd been asking Rachel questions through the summer about real estate investing, about how to start, about what he should be reading. She'd told him to ask me directly. It took him a few months, but he got there. We sat across from each other with club sandwiches, and I walked him through the basics. Not the complicated parts. The basics. Start with one. Buy something you can manage. Don't overpay for a vision of what something could be. Pay for what it is right now. Keep your personal expenses low so the math works. Be patient. Be very, very patient. He took notes on his phone. Genuine notes. He asked good questions. "Why didn't you just tell people what you were doing?" he asked at one point. "Years ago. It would have saved a lot of—" He paused. "A lot of me being an idiot." "I don't know," I said honestly. "Partly I didn't want people to treat me differently. Partly I think I just wanted to prove it was real before I talked about it. Like if I said it out loud too early, I'd jinx it somehow." "That's very Polish of you," he said. I laughed. He wasn't wrong. My dad was the same, I said. He never talked about money. He just worked, came home, paid the bills, didn't complain. I think I absorbed that. "My family talked about money all the time," Derek said. "Status, anyway. What things cost. What things signaled." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I think I absorbed that too. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. The Corolla hit 280,000 kilometers in November. I took it in for a service, and the mechanic, a guy named Frank who'd been looking after it for years, gave me the full report and said it had at least another 60,000 inches it if I kept up the maintenance. "You want to think about replacing it?" Frank asked. Not pushing, just asking. "Not really," I said. "She's a good car," he said. "She is," I agreed. Rachel asked me that same week if I ever thought about upgrading. We were in the kitchen after dinner, loading the dishwasher. "Sometimes," I said. "Then I think about what I'd do with the money instead, and I don't think about it anymore." She handed me the last plate. "You know, when we first started dating, and you showed up to everything in that beat-up Corolla, I thought you were either really broke or really interesting. Which did you decide?" "Both," she said. "Turned out both were wrong, technically. But I kept you anyway." I dried the plate and put it away. "For the record," I said, "the Corolla wasn't beat up in 2013. The paint on your arm was. That was from the Cannon Street duplex." "I know," she said. "That's when I decided you were interesting. There's something I think about sometimes. Late in the evening when the house is quiet and I'm going over the numbers or reading or just sitting with a cup of tea, I think about the version of myself that could have taken Derek's bait, that could have leased something impressive, upgraded the watch, moved into a bigger house than we needed, started performing a version of success instead of building one. I know people who did that. I have empathy for it. The pressure is real. The noise is real. When the people around you measure everything in signals and appearances, it takes something out of you to keep opting out of that game. Some days it's easier than others. But what I've come to believe, through 16 years of buying unglamorous properties in unglamorous neighborhoods and fixing things myself and driving a car that nobody photographs, is this. The gap between what something looks like and what it actually is, that gap is where real wealth lives. Not the appearance of it, the actual thing. Being debt-free gave me options. Options gave me time. Time gave me choices that money alone can't buy. I chose to rent a commercial space, below market rate, to a coding program for kids who needed it. I chose to hire Priya, who had good instincts and needed a real opportunity. I chose to have lunch with Derek and give him the honest version of what I knew instead of holding it back because of how he'd treated me. None of those choices looked impressive from the outside. None of them showed up on a lease or a showroom floor. But they're the choices I'm most certain about when I lie awake at 3 in the morning, which is when the real audit of your life tends to happen. The Corolla is still in the driveway. Rachel leaves for work before I do most mornings, and she drives the Camry we bought last year used, obviously, 3 years old, with low mileage, paid cash. The kind of purchase that takes about 40 minutes and generates zero conversation at dinner parties. That suits us fine. Last week my mother called on Sunday morning like she always does. She asked about Rachel, about the Brantford building, about whether I'd been eating properly. At the end of the call she said, "Your father would have liked Rachel, and he would have liked what you've done." I said thank you, and meant it fully. Then I poured a second cup of coffee and went to look at a listing in Grimsby that Phil had forwarded on Friday. A tired-looking fourplex on a good street, priced below where it should be because the current owner was tired of managing it. Solid bones, some deferred maintenance. The kind of property that most buyers scroll past because it doesn't photograph well. My favorite kind. If there's anything I've learned that's worth passing on, it's this. The car you drive is not your character. The neighborhood you live in is not your ceiling. The people who measure you by what you own are measuring themselves, not you, and that's a math problem they're going to be solving for the rest of their lives without ever arriving at the right answer. Real financial freedom isn't built in a weekend or a year. It's built in the gap between what you earn and what you spend, widened steadily, patiently, over time. Every unnecessary payment you eliminate is a choice you get to make with that money instead. Every debt you pay off is a weight that stops pressing on every decision that follows. The first step isn't glamorous. It's just not spending money you don't have to impress people who aren't paying attention anyway. Start with one thing you can actually afford. Learn it completely, then do it again. Drive whatever gets you there.